February 23, 2004, Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. A United States Army press release announces the cancellation of the RAH-66 Comanche program. The language is bureaucratic and measured. The Army has determined that the program no longer meets the needs of the transformed force. Resources will be redirected toward other priorities. The statement does not mention the 2 flying prototypes sitting in a hangar at Sikorsky's facility in West Palm Beach, Florida. It does not mention the 5,000 Sikorsky and Boeing employees who will lose their jobs within months. It does not mention the $7.9 billion that has already been spent on a program that has produced exactly 2 aircraft, neither of which has ever fired a weapon in anger, neither of which has ever flown in a combat zone, and neither of which will ever do so. The Comanche program ran for 21 years. It produced 2 helicopters. It cost more per flying prototype than almost any weapons program in American history. And when it ended, the Army did not attempt to salvage what it had built. The 2 prototypes were placed in museums. The production tooling was shut down. The engineers dispersed. A $7.9 billion program that had been described at various points in its life as the future of Army aviation, the most advanced helicopter ever designed, and the aircraft that would define rotary-wing warfare for the next 50 years, ended with a press release and 2 aircraft behind glass. To understand how the Comanche happened, you need to understand the Army's position in the early 1980s. The Cold War had produced a specific tactical problem. The Soviet Union had developed the most capable anti-aircraft missile systems in the world, deployed in dense overlapping networks across the potential European battlefield. American attack helicopters, the AH-64 Apache and the OH-58 Kiowa, were effective weapons but highly visible and vulnerable to radar-guided missiles. A Soviet armored thrust into West Germany would be met by American helicopter gunships that Soviet air defense could track, target, and kill with high reliability. What the Army needed was a helicopter that Soviet radar could not see. A helicopter that could infiltrate a defended airspace, scout the battlefield, designate targets for Apache gunships operating behind it, and if necessary, engage those targets directly without ever appearing on an enemy radar screen. The requirement that emerged in 1983 was designated LHX, Light Helicopter Experimental. It was ambitious almost to the point of fantasy. The aircraft had to be stealthy enough to evade Soviet radar, fast enough to escape if detected, agile enough to fight at low altitude in dense terrain, and capable enough to replace 5 existing helicopter types simultaneously. It had to carry a 20-millimeter cannon, Hellfire missiles, and Stinger air-to-air missiles. It had to fly at 175 knots, operate in all weather conditions, and be maintainable by a crew of 2 in a forward field environment. The specification was, by any reasonable assessment, asking for something that did not yet exist. The competition to build LHX was one of the largest defense contracts in American history. Boeing and Sikorsky teamed together on one bid. Bell and McDonnell Douglas teamed on the other. In April 1991, after years of design work and billions of dollars in proposal costs, the Army selected the Boeing Sikorsky team. The aircraft was redesignated RAH-66 Comanche, Reconnaissance Attack Helicopter, named for the Comanche people. The plan called for 1,292 aircraft to be built at a unit cost of approximately $12 million each. That figure would not survive contact with reality. The Comanche's design was genuinely revolutionary. Its fuselage was shaped to deflect radar energy rather than return it to the source, using the same angular geometry principles that had been developed for fixed-wing stealth aircraft. The rotor blades were specially designed to reduce radar cross-section. The engine exhausts were shielded and mixed with cool air to reduce infrared signature, making the aircraft harder to detect with heat-seeking missiles. the landing gear retracted fully into the fuselage. The weapons were stored internally in fold-out bays, eliminating the external hardpoints that dramatically increase radar visibility on conventional helicopters. The avionics suite was fully integrated, giving the pilot and co-pilot/gunner a shared digital picture of the battlefield fed by sensors that could detect and classify targets in darkness and bad weather. The cockpit used night vision displays and a helmet-mounted sight system that allowed the pilot to aim the turret gun simply by looking at a target. In 1991, this was technology that existed at the extreme edge of what was achievable. Building it into a production aircraft reliably at a price the Army could afford was a different question entirely. The first prototype flew on January 4, 1996, at Sikorsky's facility in West Palm Beach. It was 5 years late. The program had already consumed billions of dollars in development costs that the original estimates had not anticipated. The delays had multiple causes. The stealth shaping requirements conflicted with aerodynamic efficiency in ways that required extensive redesign. The integrated avionics suite, which was supposed to be the aircraft's central competitive advantage, proved enormously difficult to develop and certify. The rotor system, designed to minimize acoustic and radar signature simultaneously, required years of refinement. Each time one problem was solved, it interacted with other systems in ways that created new problems. The two prototypes that eventually flew demonstrated that the fundamental concept was sound. The Comanche was stealthy, fast, and agile. But the path from two hand-built prototypes to 1,292 production aircraft at an affordable unit cost was not clearly visible from where the program stood in the late 1990s. The cost estimates climbed with each annual review. By the late 1990s, the projected unit cost had risen from $12 million to over $30 million per aircraft. The total program cost, including development, production, and support, was now projected at figures that bore no relationship to the original budget. The Army was simultaneously funding the Comanche development, buying additional Apaches, upgrading its Kiowa fleet, and competing for resources with every other service and every other program in the defense budget. Something had to give. In 1999 and again in 2001, the Comanche program was restructured. The production numbers were reduced, the schedule was extended, the unit costs increased further with each restructuring. The aircraft that had been intended to enter service in the mid-1990s was now projected to reach initial operational capability sometime after 2009. Then came September 11, 2001. The world the Comanche had been designed to fight in, a NATO-Warsaw-pact conventional war in Central Europe, with dense Soviet air defense networks and massed armored formations, no longer existed as a planning scenario. The United States Army was fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, environments characterized by insurgency, improvised explosive devices, and an enemy that possessed no radar-guided air defense systems whatsoever. The Apache, the aircraft the Comanche was supposed to complement and in some roles replace, was performing effectively in both theaters. The Kiowa Warrior was flying reconnaissance missions that the Comanche had been designed to perform in a threat environment that did not exist in Kandahar or Fallujah. The strategic rationale for the Comanche had not merely weakened, it had evaporated. The Army conducted a formal review in 2003. The numbers were unambiguous. The Comanche program had consumed $7.9 billion. It had produced 2 prototypes. To complete development and reach initial production would require an additional $14.6 billion over the following decade. The total cost of fielding 800 Comanches, the revised production number after multiple restructurings, would exceed $26 billion. For that expenditure, the Army would receive a helicopter optimized for a threat that no longer existed, entering service 15 years late, at a unit cost that had increased by a factor of 4 from the original estimate. The alternative was to cancel the program and redirect the remaining funds toward capabilities that were actually needed in the wars the Army was currently fighting: additional Apaches, unmanned aerial vehicles, communications equipment, force protection for soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. The review concluded that cancellation was the correct decision. On February 23, 2004, the press release went out. The decision to cancel was, by the logic of the situation in 2004, defensible. The threat the Comanche was designed for was gone. The cost had become untenable. The wars being fought required different capabilities. But the Comanche story raises questions that the cancellation decision does not answer. The program ran for 21 years and produced 2 aircraft. At what point in those 21 years did the cost trajectory become clear enough that a different decision might have been made earlier? The first major restructuring came in 1999, 16 years and billions of dollars into the program. The strategic environment began shifting with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, 8 years before the first restructuring. The gap between when the rationale for the program began to erode and when the institutional response to that erosion arrived was measured in years and billions of dollars. The 2 Comanche prototypes are in museums. The first, serial number 94-0327, is at the U.S. Army Aviation Museum at Fort Rucker, Alabama, now Fort Novosel. The second, serial number 95-0001, is at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum's Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia, displayed alongside aircraft that actually entered service. Both of them are in extraordinary condition. Both of them are examples of genuine engineering achievement. The Comanche was, by every technical assessment, exactly what it claimed to be: stealthy, capable, and revolutionary. It was also a program that consumed 21 years and $7.9 billion and produced nothing that ever flew in combat. That combination, technical success and programmatic catastrophe, is the Comanche's specific contribution to the history of American defense procurement. Not the first program to cost more than planned. Not the first to be canceled after years of development. The first to do both on that scale and leave behind 2 helicopters in museums as the only tangible evidence that it ever existed. The broader lesson the Comanche offers is about the relationship between requirements and time. The LHX requirement was written in 1983. The Cold War ended in 1991. The requirement was not fundamentally revised until 2003, 20 years after it was originally drafted. In those 20 years, the threat environment changed beyond recognition. The cost increased by a factor that made it unaffordable, and the technology proved far harder to translate into production reality than the original estimates projected. The Soviet Union's decline was visible in the late 1980s. The cost trajectory was visible from the first major restructuring. The question is not whether these things could have been seen. It is why seeing them did not produce a different response until 20 years of spending had already occurred. The Comanche sits in a museum because they were not.